evening and welcome to the last in our series of student webinars for 2016, this one looking at the nature versus nurture debate. Just so you're aware, we do have plenty more webinars coming up in 2017. We're going to continue with our issues and debates series of webinars throughout January. Then into February, we're going to move on to biopsychology. So we're sticking with the core areas of psychology that students need for their exams. So do sign up to those, or if you're unable to see them, do watch the recordings of those online, okay? Now, to make life even easier, we've placed all of the recordings and linked to the resources for these webinars onto the Tutor2U website, and you can find it in 3 very easy steps. So if you visit tutor2u.net/psychology, click on the Reference Library tab at the top of the page, then from the drop-down menu, click on CPD Webinar Recordings, and then last but not least, click Filter Results. You'll then gain access to all of our previous recordings for our webinar series on that website. Now, in terms of this evening's webinar, 3 things I'd like to go through. Start by looking at the definitions, which is really important within the issues and debates topic. So 4 or 5 definitions you need to be aware of for the nature-nurture debate. Then we're going to look at the types of questions that could come up in the exam and a few little things to watch out for there. And then last but not least, we'll look at how you would tackle an essay question for the nature-nurture debate. And I think this one's probably harder than the essay we looked at in our previous webinar on free will and determinism, and I'll mention why when we get there. Okay, so on to the definitions. So you'll notice at the top of the screen that there's 5 key definitions, and these are named in the specification that you need to be aware of, including nature, heredity, nurture, environment, and the interactionist approach. Don't miss out that interactionist approach, because as you're about to see through this webinar, that is becoming a more and more important area of psychology, and it's particularly important for your evaluation should an essay question on nature-nurture come up, again as you're going to see later in this webinar. So to start with our definitions, if we take nature, nature is the view that behaviour is the product of innate biological or genetic factors. Okay, so it's a product of our genes. On top of that, there's the key term heredity that you need to know. And heredity is the process in which traits are passed down from one generation to the next. Or in other words, really, it's the process of genetic inheritance. Okay, so make sure you're aware of that key term. On the opposite side of the debate, you've got the nurture argument. And nurture is the point of view that behaviour is the product of environmental influences. And when we talk about the environment, this is anything that occurs outside of the human body. So it can include people, events, physical world that we live in, okay? So you've got these 2 really broad and key distinctions, nature versus nurture. But what's becoming more and more important, as you're going to see on the screen now, is this idea that actually these 2 things interact. Most behaviours, characteristics or traits are not the product of nature or nurture, but in reality it's actually a combination of the 2 factors working together, and that's what's known as an interactionist approach. And the interactionist approach is the view that both nature and nurture somehow work together to shape human behaviour, and that's what psychologists are becoming more and more interested in. Okay. Now, as always, I think it's really crucial when you learn any topic, especially within issues and debates, that you have a really clear, concrete example that you can draw on to illustrate your definitions from somewhere that you've studied in psychology. So if we go back to our idea of nature and try and come up with an example that works here, as always, I'm going to try and draw on mainly Year 1 examples because I think that makes life easier for everyone. If we think about an example that goes with nature, think back to your attachment topic that you studied in Year 1. And Bowlby argued that children come into the world biologically programmed to form an attachment, usually to their mother. This is the idea of monotropy, that will then help them to survive. Okay? So therefore, according to Bowlby, his argument is that attachment behaviours are naturally selected and passed down as a result of genetic inheritance or heredity mechanisms, which is the key term we just mentioned, because they enable the children to survive. Okay, so a clear example of nature there. So in terms of the behaviour, Bowlby was talking about attachment. In terms of the cause of that behaviour, he was saying that it's an innate biological factor that's been passed down through evolution, really, to help us survive. Okay, if we think about an example for nurture, I'm going to stick with, though, thinking of attachment, because actually there's a competing argument here. Behavioural psychologists argue something completely different. They say that children attach as a result of classical conditioning, where the food, which is an unconditioned stimulus, becomes associated with the mother, who according to this theory is a neutral stimulus. And through this happening many times, because the mums tend to feed the children 6, 7, 8 times a day, the mum becomes a conditioned stimulus, who produces or elicits a conditioned response, feelings of pleasure in the child, and therefore the attachment is formed on the basis of this pleasure experienced purely as a result of being fed, okay? So it's not some emotional attachment according to behaviour psychologists, it's purely an association between the mum and a source of pleasure from being fed, okay? So again, if we think about that in terms of just breaking it down, the behaviour again is attachment, and the cause of that behaviour is classical conditioning, learning, which is coming from the environment. Okay, so you've got two nice examples there, one for nature with bulbous theory, one for nurture with classical conditioning. Now, if we think about the interactionist approach, I'm actually going to use an example that isn't from somewhere you've studied in psychology, probably yet, but it's just a really, really great example of nature and nurture working or operating together, and you'll see why. So you've probably heard of this genetic disorder. There's a genetic disorder, PKU, phenylketonuria, which is caused by the inheritance of two recessive genes. So when newborn children are, or when infants are born, 5 days old, they have a blood drop test which is taken from the hill. So there's a pinprick into the hill and they take a sample of blood, and that's to detect this particular genetic disorder. Okay. If it didn't go detected, people with PKU are unable to actually break down a certain amino acid, okay, which builds up over time and can lead to brain damage, mental retardation. Okay. Now, the reason that doctors and nurses do this test at 5 days old is because if they detect PKU, all that has to happen is the child is placed on a low protein diet for the first 12 years of their life, and it completely avoids this serious illness from taking place, okay? Now, the reason this is such a great example is because the disorder PKU is clearly an example of nature because it's inherited, two recessive genes, it's genetic. But it's not expressed if we alter the environment. So a low protein diet, nurture, completely stops that disorder from actually occurring, okay? So if we think about that interactionist approach, PKU is a really great example because nature, the genetic inheritance, and nurture, high protein, so if the child wasn't placed on a low protein diet, have to work together in order for someone to experience the negative effects of this disorder. So it's not just one or the other, it's actually a clear example of interaction. So I really, really like that example there. So there we have it in terms of our definitions. We've got nature, nurture, and the interactionist approach, and broken within that we've got heredity and the environment that we need to be aware of as well, okay? So in terms of the types of questions, I haven't really ever seen any multiple choice questions for nature nurture, but that doesn't mean one couldn't come up, and it would be quite logical to include one. But for today, we're going to focus on short answer questions, application questions, which are quite common in this area of the course, and the all-important essay question. So just to give you a flavour of the different types of questions, you could get a question like this: what is meant by the nature-nurture debate in psychology? 2 marks. I could also see that being a 4-mark short answer question. You could get an application question, which there is a graph for this one, which I'll show you in a moment's time. So researchers used maths GCSE results of identical and non-identical twins to assess their maths ability. If the twins had similar results, then their results were said to be concurrent. The results of the experiment are shown in the graph below. We'll look at that in a moment. What can you conclude from the graph in relation to the nature-nurture debate? Very common type of question to get an application question around this particular debate, okay? Last but not least, you could get the essay question. And I've included this one deliberately because it appears in one of the sample papers, I believe, or if not, it appears on Exam Pro, which is for teachers. Discuss the nature-nurture debate in psychology and refer to at least 2 topics you've studied in your answer. And I've included this one deliberately because it's that last bit in bold that you need to think really carefully about in terms of where am I going to draw my examples from and show the examiner that I've actually got knowledge from either Year 1 or Year 2 topics that I've studied, okay? Now, with that in mind, let's take a look at that short answer question. So what's meant by nature-nurture debate in psychology? And I want you to consider how many marks this answer would be worth, okay? So nature is the view that behaviour is the product of innate, biological or genetic factors. And nurture is the view that behaviour is the product of environmental influences. So you'll see here, I'm just going to let you sort of ponder on that particular question for a moment. You'll see here I've literally just taken the definitions from my earlier slides, defined nature, and I've defined nurture, okay? Now, in terms of this particular answer, it actually hasn't fully answered the question, and that's something I want you to be aware of with this particular part of the course. At the moment, that would only receive 1 out of 2. And the reason being is because the answer's not focused on a key word in the question, which you may have spotted, I'm hoping you spotted by now, is the word debate. I've defined nature, I've defined nurture, but I've not actually said what the nature-nurture debate is in psychology, so just be aware of that. So if we wanted to improve that answer and make sure we're signposting our answer to the question, and I've highlighted it on screen there for you, a better answer to this question would be that nature is the view that behaviour is the product of biological genetic factors, nurture is the view that behaviour is the product of environmental influences, and the nature versus nurture debate centres on the relative contribution, and I've highlighted that deliberately, that's the important part, of genetic factors and environmental factors to human development. So the debate really now is weighing up to what extent is a behaviour the result of nature, to what extent is it a result of nurture, and really because of the whole idea of interactionist approach, it's trying to weigh up the relative contribution of nature versus nurture. Is it more nature or is it more nurture? Okay, so just be aware of that. If the question mentions the word debate, especially in a definition, don't just define your key terms, make sure you're saying what the debate in psychology is actually about. On to the application question. So I've shown you the graph now. So researchers have used GCSE maths results of identical and non-identical twins to assess their maths ability. That seems a sensible measure. If the twins had similar results, then they were said to be concurrent. The results of the experiment are shown in the graph below. What can you conclude from the graph in relation to the nature-nurture debate? 4 marks, okay? So you see you've been given a graph there, and it says the identical twins have a concordance rate of 65%. The non-identical twins have a concordance rate of 18%. Just going to shift the question in the graph over so we've got some more room. In terms of answering this question, it's 4 marks, and what's really key is it wants us again to talk about nature and nurture within our answer. Okay, so the results of the graph clearly or partly support the idea of nature, okay, and I'll explain why. So it supports nature because the monozygotic twins have a much higher concordance rate than the dizygotic twins, okay, 65 versus 18%, which suggests that the behaviour is partly the result of nature because MZ twins share all of their genes, they're 100% genetically the same, and they have a much significantly stronger concordance rate. So that stronger concordance rate shows that the more genes we share with someone, the more likely our maths abilities are to be the same, okay? Now, we've only answered one side of the debate, and what the question's really getting at is, well, what about nurture then? And the key here is that the results also indicate the role of nurture, because the concordance rate isn't 100%, it's only 65% in identical twins, which suggests that environmental factors have to play some role. Because identical twins share all of their genes, if it was purely nature, that concordance rate would be 100%. The fact it's not means environment plays some extent the behaviour or some extent in terms of maths GCSE ability, okay? So just be aware of that, and that's what twin studies get used for quite a lot in terms of the nature-nurture debate. Brilliant, so we've seen our short answer question, we've seen our application question. We'll just turn our attention for the final part of this webinar onto the essay question, discuss the nature-nurture debate, referring to at least 2 topics you've studied in your answer, a 16 marker. Now, I went through the planning process in our previous webinar, but just in case anyone's new or missed out, or just as a nice useful reminder, the term discuss does just really mean outline and evaluate. You have approximately 20-25 minutes as a real maximum to answer an essay question. You're looking to write approximately 500 words in this particular time frame, and within that you've got, roughly speaking, 175 of your words are AO1 marks, okay, 6 marks for AO1, and 325ish therefore become evaluation, 10 marks, okay? Now, I highly recommend planning out your essay, okay? As an examiner, I rarely see students use the planning box at the top of essays, and I think it's really useful for you in your exam to know exactly what's going to be in my AO1, exactly what's going to be my evaluation points. It's useful for the examiner also to see that if you run out of time, they know where you were going to go with that essay potentially as well. So planning is really, really useful. In terms of this essay, I think it's important to have an introduction, and I rarely say that, but I think with a debate essay like this, it's important to really outline what the debate actually is. So this idea that it's actually centred on the contribution of nature and nurture, to show the examiner that you have an awareness of more than just the key terms. So I would have a short introduction here. I would then break my AO1 section down into nature, where I define nature, I define heredity, or make sure I get the idea of genetic inheritance in there, and I give a year 1, a nice example from year 1, Bowlby's theory of attachment. Then do exactly the same for nurture, okay? I define nurture, define what I mean by the environment, and I link my definition and my sort of example of environment to the behaviourist view of attachment, okay? And that would easily fill up the 175 words introduction or outline really I should be saying, to your essay, the 6-mark outline you're looking to achieve, okay? To show you what that looks like, it can be done, and actually this one is exactly 175 words. I didn't intend to do that, but just to give you a flavour, I'll read it out to you, and you can see actually we've packed a lot of content in there. I've included different examples just to show you don't need to stick with mine. I want to show you that actually there is more variation to essays than just the ones I prescribe. So I've said amongst the most famous and consistently evoked debates in psychology is that which is often summarised and simplified as nature versus nurture. Okay. The nurture side of the debate suggests that our behaviour is the product of environmental influences which are caused by interactions with the environment. These interactions include our social and our physical world and can be referred to as experience. For example, it's been suggested that attachment behaviours might be explained as a result of classical and/or operant conditioning. Nature, on the other hand, refers to innate influences on human behaviour and cognition, be it biological or genetic, to any characteristics determined by genes, either at birth or subsequently thereafter, okay? Many psychological disorders, for example schizophrenia, so I've actually chosen a year 2 topic that I teach here, are said to have a genetic component. Researchers found that a concordance rate of 40% in MZ twins, 7% in dizygotic twins, suggesting that nature is a powerful contributing factor in schizophrenia. Similarly, Huntington's disease is a genetically transmitted disorder that usually emerges between the ages of 30 and 50, although it can appear at any time, since the genetic cause is innately present. So I've actually chosen 2 different examples, but it works the same. You could use Bowlby in there if you wanted to as your example of attachment. Exactly 175 words. You'll see I've clearly got in nature and nurture, clearly got in environment, clearly got in the idea of hereditary or genetic influence, nicely summarised in 175 words only. So there we have it. We've got our outline done. What we need to now have in our mind is a clear plan of where we're going to go in terms of evaluating an essay like this, okay? And I always tend to map out at least 3 points that I could use if I get the time to write about them. And remember, what we're looking for is the quality of the evaluation, not simply the number of points. So I may only include 3 points if I go into enough depth with those points, okay? The first point I would use is from a year 2 biopsychology topic, and I'm going to use the study Maguire as a really clear example of the interactionist approach in psychology, okay? I'm then going to choose a different year 1 topic. I'm going to look at psychopathology and look at twin studies and OCD, and you have the study by Nestat there. And then last but not least, I would look at, again, still looking at the interactionist approach because that evaluates nature and nurture. I would look at the diathesis stress model, which is a real world application of the nature-nurture debate to the treatments of any types of disorders, really, okay? So if we take that first one, I'm only going to show you 2 as always, so I don't want to give you everything. So I'm going to show you how I would use these 2 points to craft evaluation points based around 2 different topics in psychology. And remember, that is specified in the question. Refer to 2 topics you have studied in your answer, okay? Now, in terms of the first one, I might say research suggests that the nature-nurture debate has become a meaningless distinction, and there is a lot of evidence which highlights the importance of an interactionist approach. Okay. Research examining neural plasticity in the topic biopsychology. Now, I've put those in bold because I've just made it really, really obvious to the examiner that I'm drawing on one of my 2 topics here, okay? So research into neural plasticity in the topic biopsychology suggests that our life experiences, our nurture, actually shape our biology, our nature. For example, Maguire investigated the hippocampi volume of London taxi drivers' brains and found that this region of the brain was larger in taxi drivers in comparison to non-taxi drivers. This shows, or Maguire concluded, that driving a taxi nurture actually had an effect on the size of the hippocampi, the nature, demonstrating the importance of an interactionist approach and presenting evidence that nurture can actually have an effect on nature. There's my first evaluation point. It's quite in-depth, as you'll see, so it's actually quite expanded already. So we're never going to include more than 3 or 4 of these types of points in an essay of this nature, okay? So there's our first one. We've got a nice evaluation point there, drawing on biopsychology from year 1. Let's do exactly the same now for Nestat and looking at twin studies and OCD, because then I've ticked off my 2 studies. So I say here, while twin studies are often used to provide support for the nature argument, nearly all twin studies highlight the need for an interactionist approach, okay? Nestat et al. Examined previous twin studies in relation to OCD and found an average concordance rate of 68% for MZ twins, 31% for DZ twins, highlighting a significant genetic component. Now, what I haven't done here, which I would strongly advise you do, is say that actually this study is taken from the psychopathology topic, okay? Now, the examiners will recognise this, but I haven't done it on this one because I want to highlight to you just how much more obvious it was in my first example I was drawing on a study versus how less obvious it is, so to speak, that I am doing it in this second one, okay? So if I was writing this again, I would make sure that I would include a piece of research from the topic psychopathology by Nesdat, examined, and then it's really, really plain to your examiner, okay? Now again, on to the final point, the explanation. These results do provide evidence of a strong genetic component, as the concordance rate of MZ twins is significantly higher than DZ twins, which suggests that the behaviour is partly caused by nature because the MZ twins share 100% genetic relatedness. I'm going to go on from that, I'm going to expand it, okay, as you can with evaluation. However, the results also highlight the role of nurture, as the concordance rate is not 100%, again highlighting the importance of taking an interactionist approach, okay? So again, a really detailed, in-depth, expanded evaluation point, okay? Now, to show you what that looks like in the whole essay, I've managed to write the whole essay in approximately 480, or exactly 481 words. My A01 is now highlighted in yellow on screen, so you can see that first 2 paragraphs is my A01 parts, okay? And I have a little introduction above that. In terms of my evaluation, my first point there, I've actually gone with a slightly different one. I used a schizophrenia example in this essay instead of the OCD one, but I've got my first evaluation point as one distinct paragraph, my second evaluation point on Maguire in this one, and then my last evaluation point I've looked at the diathesis stress model as another example of an interactionist approach, okay? So 3 clear separate evaluation points, 481 words, so getting close to our 500 word sort of ideal, and clearly would be a Mark Band 4 essay, but I'll let you read that in your own time. As I mentioned previously, in terms of top tips for essay writing, do just be aware that I don't recommend just trying to learn the essays that the tutor to you actually write, okay? Turn them into bullet point plans like we've done. Do practice writing in 20 to 25 minutes only, but look at the sample essays that we provide and write the evaluation in your own way, because we've written them in a very sort of teacher academic way. Try and turn it into your own much more simple point, evidence, explain, burger paragraphs, okay? Finally, especially in that nurture essay, you'll see there's some points where I've actually included in the examiner commentary that there could be some improvements made to that essay. Although it's likely to be a Mark Band 4 essay, there's things that could be even better with that essay, okay? So do look at the examiner commentary to understand why some points are effective and how some points could be even more effective. Now, as always, we provide these webinars for free because we think that the learning experience should be free, but we do also provide some additional resources for students. So if you want to buy our handouts that go with these particular activities, there is a blank handout for you to complete in your own time to practice some of these concepts and really get your head around the idea of nature nurture, and that comes with a complete answer sheet. The resource bundle is usually £2 plus VAT, and what that includes is, of course, the Nature Nurture PowerPoint, which you've just seen on screen, the sample essay with examiner commentary, and the topic worksheet with answers. But because it's Christmas, our CEO, Jim, has kindly agreed that you can use the voucher code PsychXmas16, which you'll see on screen now. And if you put that in when you're checking out, you'll get the whole resource bundle for free, okay? And that's valid up until Christmas Eve. So if you're watching this video on YouTube, you can still take part in that free offer. It's valid up until Christmas Eve. So do try and get that in quick and make the most of that. If you really want to treat yourself, those core topic essays, we've written one for every single possible essay question that could come up in issues, debates, biopsychology and approaches. So one for each topic of the likely ones that could come up, and you can buy the printed edition of those for £10 from our website as well, okay? That's enough from me. If you have any questions, of course, do feel free to get in contact with us either via Twitter or the Facebook groups. And if you ever need any sort of support, guidance or advice, do come to us and we'll do our best to help you. Thanks for watching. Hope you found that useful, and I wish you a very, very Merry Christmas and all the best for 2017. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.